How do we change? And more to the point, why? I'm going to channel a person who I was 5 years ago. Maybe you recognize him. I was overweight, living in a 2-bedroom apartment, sleeping in my own bed, and living a life as much as I could locked away in that bedroom. I would spend my days working at my computer, at my desk, getting through it as quickly as possible, distracting myself as much as I could get away with. And then, as soon as I could, I would close out work and on the same device, open up Play and start allowing myself to live in a digital world. I would be exploring MMOs and various digital substitutions for community and exploration within a world. What I most deeply wanted at that time was to be left alone by the real world. I wanted not to be bothered by bills, by my wife, by my family, by the people who employed me. I really felt a deep need to protect myself from the irritations of the real world. And it's a deep need that I didn't question for a long time. It's been building and festering for about 20 years at that point. And it's a longer story to tell there, but I don't think it's the story for this discussion. But we did ask the question, why change? And in that case, there was an inciting incident. I've written about it. I'll drop a link to an article that I wrote here in the video description. But the key thing to understand was I got to a point where I realized that my desire to flee from the real world had put me in a position where I would likely leave it, and in short order. I put my health in serious danger by the way that I lived, the way that I consumed, and I needed to either start making a change or consign myself to a short, determined fate. I made the first choice. I decided to change. And I can't really explain why I was the person at that time that I was who would make that change. I think perhaps I was, in many of the ways that I was fortunate in my upbringing, it codified in me a sort of natural optimism. And being raised a millennial, that was sort of the inheritance of our generation, is the understanding that we can do it and we'd better. Whatever the reason, I decided to change and started to try. Maybe you are in a similar situation. Maybe there's something about the way that you live in the real world, that is to say, outside your phone and your video game and your inbox, outside of social media. Maybe there's something about it that's untenable, that is unsustainable. You're using it to treat yourself, to distract yourself. And I don't mean in a small, trivial way that you can kind of optimize and get some time back. I mean in the way that really will take your life from you over time and eventually completely. If you're in this position, you know it, you feel it the way I felt it. And I hope you find your moment that challenges you to decide one way or the other. And I hope when that moment finds you, that you will decide to change, because it does require a rational decision. Here's my hypothesis about change. Changing oneself is about an alchemical combination of the known and the unknown, the familiar and comforting with the strange and the new. It's about an effective pairing of these two modes that is connected to a rational intention that the person being changed decides for themselves. Now, if someone tells us we need to change and we attempt to hook that familiarity and strangeness combination to someone else's intent, it might help us and it might drag us towards our own intention. This is something I think a lot of, especially young people in their position of, or they don't know themselves well enough to create their own intentions, and their intentions are mostly borrowed. I think this is okay, and not just for young people, but for anyone. In fact, reflecting on it, it might not even be a useful distinction because chaining yourself to any irrational intention is better than chaining yourself to none. But what we're chaining ourselves to, this rational intention, is, again, equal parts known and unknown. When we get started, we may wish to make this err more on the side of 2/3 known, 1/3 unknown, just in order to give ourselves the encouragement that we can change. If you're in the same position that I was in years ago, then you have been the victim of not changing for a long time. And these changes are long overdue. And you have a story of yourself that you can't do it. One of the key outcomes of engaging in change and successfully engaging in change is changing that story from I can't, therefore I won't, to I may, therefore I will. We need to create a body of evidence for ourselves to believe it. But if we start, even with something very small, we will come to believe it. And that belief will fuel greater things. I think that we culturally are usually drawn in one of two polar directions. I talk about the known and the unknown, the comforting, the agitating, especially if we allow ourselves to engage in kind of the global media culture. Most kinds of things that we consume are here to either comfort us or to agitate us. There's not much room for the middle. Um, I think there are good reasons for this, and I think that can be explained, but that's not the point of this discussion. But being aware of this, what it does to me is it paints the picture of a risk that we all take whenever we really, really engage in consumption of these things outside of ourself. Now, this isn't just new media channels, but this can be old media too. Things like books and newspapers and things like this. Really, whenever we borrow a mode of thinking from without, it is to our advantage to understand what we're doing and why. Because how do I say this? We only have so much time here on Earth. And if we spend all of our time in Azeroth, in a cinematic universe, or on Reddit, or wherever else we're spilling our lives, will we really have lived? Will we really have honored the gift of this life? I think the way to honor the gift of life is to create it for yourself. And again, to use your rationality to choose a path for yourself that you choose, that I choose, and to engage in this alchemy of change. A few little examples of alchemy of change and things that worked for me early on. I've talked about these before, so I'll try to be brief. But I was interested in starting to peel myself out of the world of online video games. I was not satisfied by engaging with them anymore, and I'd tried everything I could think of. And so I thought of something new. And rather than taking myself wholly out of that world, I started a new thing with one foot still in that world, which was I started a gaming podcast. And that bore many interesting fruit. What it did was it helped me tell a new story about myself and about a lot of other really great people I got to connect with. But I went from being someone who was unsatisfied playing video games with people who I felt were not engaging in good faith to all of a sudden being a contributor to something larger than myself with people who were contributing in good faith. Because when someone takes time out of their professional schedule to sit down and talk with me and share it out with the world, that's not an act. I mean, of course, that can be an act of self interest, but for someone like me, the scale I was at, that's just an act of love. Love to a community, love for the human connection. And I got to play with that human connection in a way I had never played before as a result of taking that one step out of that world into podcasting. And now, not everyone can do that. I use skills that I already had to get started with that and resources I already had. I already had a professional career where I had plenty of experience running conference calls and I knew how to relate to someone in that way. Um, I had the confidence in being able to speak in public. It came from a lot from performing when I was a kid and grew up doing a lot of singing. And of course, I had the means. I had a career in tech, and I could get the equipment that I needed, and I could make the time to actually put in the effort. Um, and most importantly, I did it all within the substrate of these online gaming worlds that I was already leaning on so heavily in order to provide a sense of meaning and a through line to my life. Maybe you can relate to that. The podcast, something I stopped doing about a year ago, because for me, I got to a point where I was ready to take my other foot out of those gaming worlds. And almost exactly a year ago, that's exactly what I did. I quit video games. It's another discussion. But what that does is it, as beautiful of a thing as this was, in combining the known with the unknown, the gaming world and my experience communicating with people, with an interest in actually relating and connecting to a broader community, being something to people and providing value and a sense of meaning to others, and doing it all while putting myself out there publicly when I was still in a place where I felt quite ashamed about the way I looked. That is the alchemy of change, and I chain that to the intention of doing something more meaningful. These intentions can be vague, they can be broad, but it was an intention that I chose. I wanted to do something more meaningful than log in and do dailies. Don't you? Hell, I don't know anyone who doesn't want something more meaningful than that. There are other examples, but I think that's sufficient for now. This was a bit of a meander, but I think I have hopefully imparted this idea of the alchemy of change. I should have said this near the start, but I used the word alchemy with deliberateness. It's because it's like a part scientific thing and a part magical thing. Like there's a part of alchemy that is inexplicable. And in that way, the strange new things that we're drawn to might not be something we can explain to ourselves yet. But those are the things that call to us and encourage us to take those strange attractions and combine them with something we know now. And in putting them together and in connecting them to a rational intent of our own, we can pull ourselves up mountains. We can move the world if we can just do this. Or so I believe. Thanks for listening, folks. I've said this before, and it still remains true. Having this platform to be able to share thoughts like these and get feedback and criticism is such a blessing. And I feel really grateful to anyone who clicks on this, or especially anyone who listens all the way to the end. And if you have listened to the end, I hope you'll leave me a little comment telling me about your day or something you thought about the video, something you liked. And till I see you again, please take great care of yourself and be good to each other. I'll see y'all again soon.